3 seconds. That's all it took to end her dream, or so they thought. Rachel Harper stepped off the transport truck at Fort Avalon with a duffel bag that had seen too many miles and a rifle case that looked like it had been passed down through generations. The wind bit through her jacket, sharp and unforgiving, but not half as cold as the stares that greeted her. She didn't look like the others. Her boots were scuffed, her fatigues faded. The rifle slung at her side was bolt action, the kind museum guides talked about, not something you'd expect at the nation's top sniper school. Around her, fresh recruits in gleaming gear strutted with confidence, their guns brand new and sleek custom optics catching the light like diamonds. One of them, a tall, smug kid with perfect posture and a Texas drawl, laughed loud enough for the group to hear, said something about time travel and antiques. The rest chuckled. Rachel didn't flinch. She'd learned a long time ago that some things were worth more than flash and speed. Still, even silence can sting when you're being treated like a joke. As the recruits moved toward formation, she lagged behind just a bit, adjusting her grip on the rifle case. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What is she doing here? No one asked it out loud, but they didn't have to. The sneers, the glances, the shared smirks said enough. Fort Avalon was a place where precision was supposedly everything, but what they really meant was fast, clean, showy. Rachel was none of that. She was methodical, measured, focused, and yet in that exact moment even she had to wonder if she'd made a mistake coming here. She had no idea that before her time at Fort Avalon was over, the same people who laughed at her would owe her everything. But right now, all she had was an old rifle, a battered notebook, and a lesson the others hadn't learned yet. Speed is easy. Precision is earned. Rachel Harper was 34 and had spent most of her adult life behind the scenes. 10 years in military logistics didn't win medals or headlines, but she knew how to make things work under pressure. She understood movement, timing, terrain, and above all, preparation. She didn't talk much, and when she did, her voice was calm and measured. There was a quiet certainty in how she carried herself, like someone who had seen enough to know that noise rarely meant strength. Most people mistook her stillness for weakness, but they never lasted long in her presence without sensing something deeper. Rachel's life had been about showing up, doing the job, and not complaining. She had grown up in a small town where expectations were low and ambition was considered impractical. Her father worked nights. Her mother juggled shifts at a local diner. It was her grandfather who taught her about focus, patience, and the importance of staying ready even when no one was watching. He had been a sniper in Vietnam. When she was 12, he gave her his old rifle and taught her how to shoot it. He didn't talk about the war much, but he made sure she understood what the weapon was meant for. Not trophies, not showboating, but for protecting others when it mattered most. She still carried that same rifle. The wood was dark with age, the metal cold, but honest. It had a weight to it, not just in pounds, but in memory. Every scratch meant something. Every shot taken through it came from years of learning what mattered and what didn't. Rachel kept a leather-bound notebook where she recorded wind conditions, distances, angles, and adjustments. It was packed with pages of numbers and lines only she could fully decipher. She never trusted digital gadgets the way others did. Not because she didn't understand them, but because she believed you should never rely on anything you didn't truly know inside and out. Her days were built on habit. She rose early, moved quietly, and observed more than she spoke. If something was broken, she fixed it. If someone needed help, she gave it. But she never expected thanks, and she never chased recognition. That quiet way of living made her invisible in places where loudness was currency. Fort Avalon was one of those places. Here, the louder you shouted, the more people listened. Here, people noticed shiny gear and fast reflexes. What they didn't notice was the woman in the corner, watching everything, writing everything down, learning where every mistake would come from before it happened. Rachel had learned a long time ago that some people needed to be seen to believe they mattered. She didn't. She knew her worth, and she knew that if the time came, the things she had trained for in silence would speak louder than any brag ever could. She didn't resent the others for overlooking her. It wasn't personal. It was just how the world worked. People were drawn to noise, motion, image. But Rachel had built her entire life around a different rhythm. The rhythm of breath, the feel of a rifle stock against her cheek, the whisper of wind across an open field. In every environment she'd entered, Rachel had been underestimated, and in every one she'd left behind results that spoke for themselves, not in applause, not in promotions, but in the quiet satisfaction of a job done right. Fort Avalon was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be about skill, about precision. But as Rachel stood among the recruits, she could already feel the old pattern taking shape. She didn't belong to their version of excellence. But she had no intention of leaving without proving that their version wasn't the only one that worked. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to be ready. And she had a notebook full of reasons why that would matter when everything else stopped working. Fort Avalon was carved into the side of a mountain, its steel corridors and concrete walls giving it the feel of something designed for war, not learning. Everything about the place was sharp, cold, and intentional. It didn't welcome you. It measured you. The motto painted across the range tower read, "First shot, fast shot, last shot." Those 6 words hung like a challenge over every recruit who stepped onto the field. Time was the god they worshipped here, and the stopwatch ruled over everything else. Training schedules were brutal. Drills were measured in milliseconds. The instructors didn't care how you got the shot off as long as it was fast and hit something close enough to count. There was no room for doubt, no allowance for second chances. If you hesitated, you were already behind. Captain Doyle was the architect of this doctrine, a former special operations marksman with scars he never talked about and a reputation for zero tolerance. He believed in muscle memory reflexes and shooting before thinking could slow you down. Precision, he said, was for competitions. Combat demanded speed. Doyle ran the school like a machine. Cadets were expected to operate the same way. Each had custom rifles tuned to their frame, digital scopes, wrist sensors that tracked breathing and stability. There were no notebooks here. Everything was automated, analyzed, and optimized for speed. The mess hall echoed with confident voices. Recruits compared split-second draw times and rapid target transitions like athletes reviewing game stats. In this place, to pause was to fail. Calculated silence was mistaken for indecision. There were wall-mounted screens in every hallway constantly cycling through performance leaderboards. Doyle made sure everyone saw where they ranked, who slipped and who surged. Shame was used as fuel, and no one wanted to be the name at the bottom. To the instructors, slow was dangerous. Fast was safe. Fast ended fights. Fast saved lives. That was the logic Fort Avalon drilled into its cadets every hour of every day. And they believed it because believing it was the only way to survive in a system that moved too fast to question itself. When Rachel arrived, no one asked if she could shoot straight. They wanted to know if she could shoot fast. That was the only metric that mattered here, and anyone who didn't fit that mold would be treated like they didn't belong. Rachel stood out the moment she stepped onto the training grounds, not because she tried to. It was because everything about her pushed against the polished rhythm of Fort Avalon. Her gear looked like it belonged in a different era. Her rifle, worn and wood-stocked, was a ghost beside the sleek black carbines the others carried. Her boots were broken and her jacket faded, and her name patch stitched on by hand. The other recruits noticed. They always noticed. They spoke louder when she walked by, made jokes that didn't try to hide behind whispers. Tyler was the worst. Young, cocky, and always surrounded by others who laughed too easily at things that weren't funny. He called her Grandma before they even knew her name. One afternoon, he nudged his friend and nodded toward her rifle, asked if she had to crank it between shots like an old tractor. The group howled. Rachel didn't look up. She kept writing in her notebook, tracking wind speed and humidity, while their laughter echoed across the field. They didn't understand why she carried paper when everything was digital, or why she didn't decorate her bunk or join the nightly card games. She moved quietly, rose early, kept her space clean. That alone made her strange to them. They measured value by volume. Noise meant confidence. Flash meant talent. And Rachel had neither. What she had was experience, the kind that didn't announce itself. She had seen young men like Tyler before. Fast hands, fast talkers, always sure they were the smartest in the room. Every evening, Rachel sat at the edge of the barracks with her notebook. She studied range patterns, wind behavior at different altitudes, scope drift across temperature shifts. No one asked her what she was doing. They assumed she was weird, slow, maybe even lost. She wasn't. She was watching, calculating, preparing. But she couldn't pretend it didn't hurt. The looks, the comments, the way even some instructors passed over her name like it didn't belong. She felt it in her chest every time. Still, she refused to defend herself. Not yet. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was a promise. They didn't think she belonged at Fort Avalon. She didn't argue. She just waited for the day they'd realize how wrong they were. The qualification range stretched out like a battlefield lined with expectation. 12 shooting lanes faced a mix of targets placed at unpredictable distances, some as close as 200 yards, others pushing 8. The mountain wind was sharp that morning, dancing through the flags like it had something to prove. Rachel stood at her assigned lane, quietly adjusting the leather strap on her bolt-action rifle. It rested steady in her hands, a familiar weight she trusted more than any electronic gadget on base. She glanced once at her notebook, flipped to a page filled with calculations in tight, steady lines. She didn't look around to see what the others were doing. She already knew. Tyler was 3 lanes over, bouncing on his heels, smirking like the test was a formality. His rifle was semi-automatic, bright and new, a gift of modern precision if used right. He looked like he couldn't wait to show off. Captain Doyle's voice barked through the loudspeaker. "Shooters, you have 60 seconds per target, speed and accuracy, both or neither." The whistle blew. Tyler's rifle snapped to life almost instantly, spitting rounds in short bursts. His hands moved fast, too fast to think, but his style fit the rhythm Fort Avalon demanded. By the time Rachel was sighting in her 3rd target, he was already halfway through. She didn't rush. Her eye followed the wind flags, reading shifts most others ignored. She adjusted for elevation pressure and range, then squeezed. Each shot landed tight-centered, like a scalpel, not a hammer. By the halfway mark, she was behind on the count, but flawless in grouping. Her fingers worked the bolt smoothly, cycling with muscle memory that came from years of knowing exactly how her rifle wanted to be handled. Her breath stayed steady, her mind quiet. When the final whistle blew, her last shot cracked through the cold air and punched a perfect hole at 700 yards. Then came the silence. Doyle called ceasefire. Everyone stepped back from their lanes. Sergeant Harmon walked the range clipboard in hand. When he reached Rachel's targets, he paused. Tightest groupings of the day, near surgical, but she'd only hit 10 out of 12, not because she missed, because she ran out of time. He called it loud enough for everyone to hear. Harper, accuracy exceptional, course incomplete, failure, 2 words that stuck to her like ice. The others turned to look. Tyler grinned. He had finished all 12. A few were off-center. 1 barely touched paper, but they all counted. As they walked back to the barracks, Rachel heard the whisper pass down the line. Slowpoke sniper. Good with a pencil, not with pressure. She kept her face calm, but the weight settled in her chest. She hadn't lost because she was wrong. She'd lost because the rules didn't value what she brought. And for the first time, she felt the sharp edge of a truth she had suspected since day 1. At Fort Avalon, being right wasn't always enough. Not if you were too slow to prove it their way. The envelope was thin, the kind of paper that held decisions no one wanted to read twice. Rachel stood by her bunk when the sergeant handed it to her. He didn't make eye contact, just muttered orders and walked off like it was any other piece of mail. Inside was her reassignment. Effective immediately. She was no longer a sniper candidate. She'd been transferred to weapons maintenance, a support role with no chance of return. There was no hearing, no appeal, just a line at the bottom that said, "Report at Oro 600. Across the room, Tyler saw her open it and smirked, asked if she'd bring her mop with her to the armory, said something about polishing his scope extra clean. Laughter followed, loud and easy. It wasn't the joke that stung. It was how normal it felt to them, like she had never belonged in the first place. Rachel didn't respond. She sat down slowly, unfolded the paper once more, then reached for her notebook. Between wind patterns and shot diagrams, she slid the reassignment letter into place. It fit there, among her notes, among things that mattered. Her hands stayed steady, but her chest ached in a quiet way. Not from failure, from being invisible, from being measured by the wrong metrics. She hadn't missed a single shot that day. Not one. but they said she wasn't fast enough, not good enough, not built for this. She didn't fight it, didn't ask for a second chance. That wasn't how she was raised. You took what came, kept your head, and found another way forward. That notebook had never lied to her, and it wouldn't now. As the barracks quieted for the night, Rachel stared at the ceiling and reminded herself why she came. Not to be seen, not to impress, but to learn to test herself and to prove that what she carried inside could hold up under pressure. She wasn't a sniper candidate anymore, but she was still a shooter, still a Harper, and tomorrow morning she'd show up at the armory exactly on time. Not to give up, to begin again. The armory was colder than the range, not just in temperature but in spirit. It smelled like oil metal and 1,000 spent hopes. Rachel reported before dawn every day just like the order said. No one greeted her when she arrived. No one asked if she knew what she was doing. They figured she'd disappear soon enough. Master Sergeant Briggs ran the place like a forgotten kingdom. Gray hair, blunt voice, always chewing gum and fixing things that were never broken. When he saw Rachel's reassignment slip, he grunted, handed her a rag, and pointed to a table lined with rifles. Nothing more. No small talk. Just tools and time. She got to work. At first it was simple cleaning. Wipe down barrels, check bolts, replace worn springs. But as the days passed, Rachel began to see more. Small things. Inconsistencies in wear patterns. Tiny cracks near trigger guards. Sights misaligned by millimeters. Rifles that looked perfect, but weren't tracking right under pressure. The same names kept coming back. Tyler's rifle, for example, had a tendency to pull left after rapid fire. Another cadet's scope drifted at long range due to a loosened inner ring. She fixed each one without being asked. Quietly, carefully. She never said a word to the shooters who dropped them off. They never noticed the repairs. They assumed they were just getting better. She kept notes. In her notebook, she created a new section. Beside the wind charts and range notes, she started logging rifle ID numbers, user initials, performance issues, and repair dates. She began to cross-reference them with simulation results when she could access the internal data. Most nights, she stayed late. The clicks of her pen echoed across the armory long after everyone else had gone. Briggs noticed. He didn't say much at first, just watched her as she moved through rows of rifles like a surgeon. One morning he dropped a folder on her table. Inside were maintenance logs from the last training cycle. Then he walked off without comment. It was his way of saying he saw what she was doing, that he approved. What Rachel found in those logs disturbed her. Many of the cadets with top speed scores had wildly inconsistent accuracy. Their shot groupings under stress widened alarmingly. A few had near-fail levels in live simulations that had been excused because their timers came in clean. It wasn't just one or two. It was a pattern. She compiled the data. At first, she thought maybe she was wrong. Maybe the numbers didn't tell the full story. But the more she checked, the clearer it became. Fort Avalon was producing shooters who could pass tests, not survive real missions. The obsession with time was masking real flaws, and no one wanted to admit it. Rachel didn't report it. Not yet. She wasn't ready to fight that battle again. Not after what it cost her the first time. But she didn't stop recording. She documented everything. Created charts, graphs, color-coded trends. She used highlighters and sticky notes to make connections even Briggs hadn't considered. Eventually, he brought her into his office. A small space with low light and boxes stacked in every corner. He handed her a password to an internal system. Said she'd need it if she wanted the full data sets. Then sat back and watched her download everything without another word. That night, Rachel saw the entire picture. She looked at the candidates slated for graduation, looked at their stress test performance, the missed targets, the wild groupings, the rifles she had repaired more than once. And she saw the truth. If these shooters went into combat as they were, someone was going to die. She didn't sleep that night. The next day, she reorganized the armory's entire documentation system. She added a secondary file cabinet with backup logs, labeled everything by hand. Briggs didn't stop her. He didn't help either. But when he passed her that afternoon, he gave a small nod. That was enough. Rachel kept working. Not for revenge. Not to prove a point. but because somewhere deep inside she still believed in what Fort Avalon was supposed to stand for. She believed in skill, in discipline, in the shot that mattered. And even if no one ever saw what she did, the rifles would know. The shooters might never thank her, but if their gear held up when it counted, that would be enough. She wasn't wearing a sniper patch. She didn't carry a rank that impressed people in the mess hall, but she was building something every day, quietly, precisely, and it was starting to grow louder than she ever expected. The air around Fort Avalon was unusually still that morning. Black SUVs lined the outer fence, and rows of high-ranking uniforms moved like a silent current through the gravel paths. General Keating from the Pentagon had arrived with her team, her presence signaling that everything today had to go perfectly. It was the biggest demonstration the sniper program had ever held. Tyler had been chosen to lead the live fire segment. He stood at the edge of the shooting platform, squared shoulders, spotless rifle eyes sharp and ready. Cameras were in place. Officials watched from an elevated observation deck. The mountain air was crisp, and the targets were pre-programmed to appear with military precision. No surprises. That was the plan. Rachel was watching from inside the armory, positioned behind a reinforced observation window, with a borrowed spotting scope resting steady in her hands. She hadn't been invited to the demonstration, but no one told her she couldn't observe. Old habits didn't fade. She still tracked wind speed, noted angles, and logged rifle data. It helped her sleep at night. The first phase went smoothly. Tyler moved with swagger, firing fast and clean. Targets dropped one after another, and the generals leaned in, visibly impressed. But Rachel noticed something odd. One of the rear target systems, usually offline during live demo, flickered to life at the wrong time. It popped up late, and it wasn't displaying the usual orange indicator. Through her scope, she tracked the problem. A target had malfunctioned and risen early at the 600-yard mark. But more importantly, someone was moving behind it. Far beyond the range boundary, a maintenance technician checked cabling near the tower. His high-vis vest was blocked from the observation deck's view, but not from Rachel's. She checked her radio. Static. The communication line had been jammed for realism. There was no open channel, no way to call range control. She tried the backup frequency. Nothing. Rachel turned back to the scope, heart pounding. Tyler was shifting his aim, his breathing steady. He had locked onto the new target, the one masking a real person. Her pulse hammered in her ears. From his angle, Tyler couldn't see what she saw. The sun hit just wrong, and the faulty target looked like a standard threat marker. He adjusted his scope. His finger found the trigger. She had seconds, maybe less. Rachel's hands moved on instinct. Not to scream, not to freeze, but to reach for her rifle. The old bolt action. She had kept it cleaned and ready, even though no one had asked her to. It sat in the corner, as forgotten as she was. Her fingers wrapped around it. She dropped to one knee by the narrow window and lined up her shot. Through her scope, she watched Tyler settle his aim. The technician beyond the range was still unaware, bending to tighten a cable. One wrong move, one shot too fast. It would end a life. The safety on her rifle clicked off. She exhaled once, reading the wind measuring distance. She didn't need time. She needed clarity. Tyler's finger began to tense. Rachel had no words, no commands, just one opportunity to make the shot that mattered. And it was now. Rachel dropped into position with the rifle steady against her shoulder. Her breath slowed to match the rhythm she had memorized over years of silence. The wind flag snapped at 30 degrees. Light, left-to-right pull. Not strong, but steady. She read the distance, adjusted for the curve of the barrel. Tyler's finger was tightening. She had a second. Through her old scope, the world shrank to one image. His rifle. The tension in his wrist. The artificial target behind it. And beyond that, the real man. The one no one else could see. Rachel reached for her notebook, flipped it open to a page stained with old fingerprints and smudged ink. Her thumb stopped on a diagram labeled exactly for this range and wind pattern. She had drawn it 3 weeks earlier, just in case. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from adrenaline flooding her limbs. She took one breath, one more, then stilled everything. her fingers wrapped around the trigger like she was holding something sacred. She didn't aim for Tyler. She aimed for the metal, just beneath his scope. The section that would tilt the barrel just enough to throw the shot wide. A warning, not a wound. She squeezed. The sound cracked through the air like lightning slicing silence. Tyler's rifle jerked sideways. His shot never fired. His scope snapped from its mount, clattering to the concrete. The entire range went still. It was as if the mountain itself had paused to breathe. General Keating turned slowly. So did the officers. Every head on the platform rotated to the glass wall of the armory. Behind it, Rachel stood, rifle lowered, face calm, her chest rising and falling with quiet conviction. Tyler spun confused, looked down at his weapon, then followed everyone else's gaze. He saw her, no smile, no gloating, just steady eyes that had seen what no one else did. Rachel stepped out from the shadows. The wind tugged at her collar as she walked toward the platform. Her boots echoed with the sound of a decision already made. She passed the stunned instructors, past the recruits who once called her slow, reached the edge of the concrete and met the general's eyes. That was the only shot that mattered. The silence broke. Commanders started barking orders. Tyler was pulled aside. The technician was escorted to safety. Rachel was told to follow the general into the strategy tent. Her rifle was taken gently, not with suspicion, but with a kind of reverence. Inside, a desk was cleared. A chair was pulled out. A pen was handed to her and a blank report form set down. The general asked for a full account. Every detail, every calculation. Rachel sat, opened her notebook, and began to write. The week after the demonstration, Rachel was summoned to a meeting unlike any she had attended before. No reprimand, no reassignment. Just a quiet room filled with commanders and a simple request: rewrite the training. They handed her complete authority over the sniper curriculum, not as a punishment, not as a placeholder, but because she had seen what no one else had. They gave her a team, a timeline, and something rare in military circles: trust. She called it adaptive precision training. The name wasn't flashy, but it was honest. The program didn't eliminate speed. It just stopped worshiping it. The focus shifted to context, to breath control, to environmental awareness. Shooters were taught to wait for the shot that mattered instead of chasing the first one they could take. Classes moved slower. Simulations were layered with unexpected variables. Recruits were taught how to read flags, not just scopes. Wind journals became standard issue. Notebook entries were reviewed and graded alongside performance. For the first time, thoughtfulness was part of the evaluation. The change didn't come easy. Some resisted. Old instructors clung to their stopwatches. A few cadets dropped out, uncomfortable with the silence the new system demanded. But others thrived. They listened more, questioned more, slowed down just enough to understand what they were doing. And then one morning, Tyler showed up again. He stood at the back of the lecture hall, not in uniform, but holding a fresh notebook and a quiet expression. He didn't ask for special treatment, just a seat. Rachel watched him from the front of the room, nodded once, and turned back to the lesson. He filled pages with wind diagrams and range calculations. No longer the loudest in the room, he listened carefully, asked questions others didn't know how to form. He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. He was trying to understand. It took time, but word spread. The recruits talked about the woman who had stopped a fatal mistake with one impossible shot. They called her Sergeant Harper now, not as a formality but as a sign of respect. Her story became part of the curriculum, not for drama, but as proof of what patience could save. On the first day of every new class, Rachel walked the line and handed each cadet a blank field notebook. She told them it wasn't about how fast they filled it. It was about what they chose to notice. Weeks later, a mural was painted above the firing range. The lettering was clean, bold, and quiet. Right shot, right time, every time. The truck pulled away from Fort Avalon just as the sun touched the ridge. Rachel sat in the back, her rifle case beside her and her notebook packed carefully beneath her coat. The mountain wind had shifted softer now, like it was letting her go. She didn't say goodbye to many people. There were no speeches, no medals, just quiet nods from those who knew what she had done. That was enough. Recognition didn't need an audience when the work had already spoken. Hours into the drive, her phone buzzed once. A message came through from a name she didn't know. The profile photo showed a young soldier, maybe 22, face, dusty eyes, bright. The message was short. I used your breathing chart. Waited 5 seconds. Saved a child's life. Thank you. Rachel read it twice, then let the screen go dark. Her hand rested over the device for a long time. Outside, the road stretched on in silence, but inside her something settled into place. She thought back to that first morning. The sneers, the jokes, the way they treated her like furniture in a room built for faster minds and louder voices. She remembered the way Tyler laughed when she opened her notebook, the way her shot had cracked through everything they thought they knew. None of that pain had vanished, but it had grown into something else, something rooted, something that wouldn't break even if no one ever said thank you again. She never wanted power. She never needed the spotlight. All she ever wanted was for her voice, quiet, steady, unshakable, to be heard by someone who needed it. And now, it had been. As the truck turned onto a long stretch of highway, she opened the notebook one last time, flipped to a blank page, wrote the name of the young soldier and the coordinates she mentioned, then closed it without adding anything more. The past had shaped her. The failure, the rejection, the silence. But it never defined her. What did were the small choices, the steady hands, the breath held just long enough to change everything. Rachel looked out at the passing landscape, eyes steady, and allowed herself one small smile. She hadn't won awards. She had rewritten a system. She hadn't led with noise. She had led with clarity. And somewhere out there in a dust-covered outpost, a young woman had made a choice that saved a life, because someone once taught her to slow down, to wait, to trust the moment. Sometimes the slowest person in the room is the only one who sees what really matters.